In this session, I'll be focusing on how nonviolent communication can support our social change efforts. In previous sessions, I have shown how social change can be used to communicate with ourselves. We've also looked how it can be used to communicate with others in our family relationships, in our work relationships. Now let's take a look at social change, which for me, to a large extent, shows how to use nonviolent communication when we are communicating with gangs. Now, some gangs call themselves gangs, street gangs. I'm not so worried about these gangs and the damage that they might be doing. But I am concerned about some other gangs. These other gangs don't call themselves gangs. These other gangs that I'm worried about, some of them call themselves governments. Some of the gangs that I'm worried about call themselves corporations. So what I mean by these gangs that I'm worried about are organizations of people that have a big impact over our lives and who are doing some things that I think contribute to great violence on the planet and great suffering. So how can each of us develop our own power, become conscious of our power and use it to transform these structures, these organizations, so that they serve life rather than threaten life? Now, this can be quite a challenge because the spirituality, language, and means of influence that these gangs that I'm worried about perpetuate make it very hard for us to become conscious of our power and to use it. The gangs that I'm worried about control through punishment and reward and try to get their own interest met at the cost sometimes of the environment, sometimes through exploitive labor practices, sometimes through the use of violence to get employees to do as they would like. The organizations that are doing the most damage on our planet can be quite a task for us to think of how we as individuals can change them. We are often overwhelmed just with our own personal lives and trying to get our needs of our family met, and it seems beyond what we can do to try to deal with these organizations that are creating a lot of pain on our planet. What can make it hard for us to get involved in social change? Many, many people who I think are being committed to prison unfairly because of our judicial system, which I didn't see treating people of all income levels equally. I was also in despair. Even if we spent our whole lives getting all out of prison who have been treated unfairly, that wouldn't be changing the structures that were creating the unfairness. I say this because nonviolent communication helps us to differentiate between objectives which are to undo the damage created by the systems, but to recognize how different that is than changing the systems that create the problem. So nonviolent communication helps us to get clear what our social change objective is. Do we want to heal some of the problems created by our present structures, economic structures, judicial structures, and others that create great pain on the planet? Do we want to just heal the people hurt by these structures? Or do we want to radically transform the structures? This is quite a difficult choice to make, quite a difficult choice. Where do we want to invest our energies? I like how this was put in an image that I read once. When do we stop pulling the babies out, and when do we go upstream and see who is throwing them in, and what structures are supporting these people to throw them in? We are confronted with many such situations today. Structures are creating enormous pain. Economic structures, judicial structures, governmental structures. The pain created by these structures is immense. So we can use nonviolent communication to heal the people hurt by these structures, or we can use nonviolent communication to go upstream and to connect with the people who are creating and supporting the structures that do the violence, and use nonviolent communication to show these people other ways of serving other than those which are oppressing people. So one way that nonviolent communication supports us is to help us to look inside and see, how do I want to meet this important need of mine to serve life, to be conscious that we have power to serve life at many levels, at healing the people who are oppressed by present circumstances, or we can go upstream being the structures that are creating the pain, and we can use our nonviolent communication consciousness and skills to connect with the people creating the damage and positively, compassionately influencing them to transform the structures so that they serve life for all rather than oppress people. Now, one important aspect of social change that's used in almost any social change event is how to make requests in a powerful way, how to ask in a way that helps us to create the social change we are interested in. As almost any social change is going to involve a certain critical mass of people changing what they are doing. That's why I like living under a king. When you live under a king, the critical mass that's necessary for social change can be one person, the king. All you have to do is get a meeting with the king and show the king a more compassionate, effective way of doing business, and if the king agrees with you, you've created social change. One person has been changed, and this can affect how many people are treated. Well, we have created much more complicated structures than we used to have under the king. Very often now, our social change efforts might involve getting 51% of the population in a certain area to vote differently. It might be to get a critical mass of people on a committee to vote in favor of something that we want, and this committee might be within a government, and this committee has great power within that government to do something we want them to do. So maybe if 4 out of the 7 members of the committee are changed in favor of what we want, we can bring about great social change. So whether it's 51% of the population that we might want to influence to change, or just one person who has great power, or a committee, social change involves the transformation of consciousness, people seeing other ways of doing things that they choose to do. That's if we want to bring about social change nonviolently. We want the change to occur because a critical mass of people willingly shift what they're doing from one position to another. Of course, violent social change basically tries to get rid of those people in power and replace them with other people. Now, to exercise our social change power using nonviolent communication to influence key people requires that we can get access to these people. And getting access is often a good use of our social change ability. To get access to people in power that we may want to communicate with, we may need to influence people who have power to get us that access to do so. It may be that we're going to need a pretty good team, a large team to work with us to get all the transformations of consciousness necessary that we're looking for. So we need to use nonviolent communication to organize a team of people who share our perspective. Introduced a dialogue in just a few words. Where's the money? And then this gave the other person a chance to ask for what he needed to know to decide whether he wanted to give us what we came for. I have used this principle in social change efforts, how to be very clear very quickly about what we want, so as to stimulate a dialogue in which the other side can find out what they need to know to determine whether they want to support us or not. Using precious time in that way increases the likelihood that we will connect in a way and get what we would like for our social change efforts. But even if we don't, by using the time in that way, we can even learn from a no what kept the person from wanting to support our project, and this can help us in subsequent efforts. So nonviolent communication can be very helpful to us, because nonviolent communication helps us to be very clear, very quickly, about what our present request is of people, instead of just talking at them and trying to sell them. Nonviolent communication helps us to quickly create a dialogue in which people get a chance to ask for what they need to know to decide whether they want to give us what we came for. Now, sometimes in our social change efforts, force may be necessary to protect ourselves from what we see organizations are doing. But of course, using nonviolent communication, whether we use force with our children or with organizations, we want to be sure that it's the protective use of force and not the punitive use of force. In other sessions, I've pointed out that protective use of force with children might be using some force to stop them from doing something that's harmful to themselves or others, but we do this stopping not with punitive efforts to punish them, but just to stop a behavior that we are concerned about until we can communicate with the child to find a more effective way of meeting their need and our need. Well, this same concept of protective use of force at times is going to be necessary in social change. There may be times when an organization is doing things that we believe is causing great damage to people in that region. And we may have hope that if we could communicate with the people who have the power to change, if we could get meetings with them, we could get them to see the damage that's being created, and we could help them to see other ways of meeting their needs and our needs. But they may not be willing to give us access to communicating with them. So that might be a situation where we would use a protective use of force. Now, the protective use of force differs from the punitive use of force in our thinking and in the intent of our strategies. The difference in our thinking is this: when we use the protective use of force, we don't see the other person as evil or bad and deserving of punishment. Our focus is on how we can stop what is creating the damage without being violent in the process of creating the stopping of the damage. So our thinking is not how bad people are who are doing the damage. Our thinking is focused on how we would like to protect life. This means that our intent is not to punish the people who are engaged in doing what we are fearful of. Our intent is simply to prevent it from continuing until we can have access enough with the people so that we can resolve our differences with them, and in which changes can be willingly made that meets everybody's needs. So these might be conditions under which we sometimes have to use force. We see an organization doing things that we might see is not meeting our needs. We might be confident if we could talk to the people who are contributing to the damage that we are concerned about, that if we could talk with them, that we could find a way of getting everybody's needs met. But if they are unwilling to communicate, these are the conditions under which we might sometimes apply the protective use of force in our social change efforts. What actions could we take that would help us create the connection with those who were doing the damage so that we could have a dialogue with them and come out with a way that would meet everybody's needs? To do this without any enemy image of the people doing this, and where the purpose of the social change action using protective use of force was just that, meet everybody's needs, but without punishing the people who were contributing to the problem. Signs communicating their intent. Change signs saying things that implied wrongness on the part of people. It would be more effective if we created signs that purely communicated our needs and our intent, but in no way implied that we saw the people as evil or bad. Getting the communication with the authorities to get needs understood and to find a way of changing policies. Now, to go about social change of this variety, where we don't see people as evil who are doing the actions that we see interfering with our needs being fulfilled, to go about social change out of that energy requires at times doing some despair work. And this kind of despair work helps us to deal with the pain that we're feeling as a result of what is happening, out of sometimes our feeling of powerlessness to do anything about it. When we do despair work, we transform our feeling of powerlessness and despair, and it helps us to come out with a transformative spirituality, to use the kind of consciousness, the kind of spirituality that supports our social change effort. It's a spirituality in which we are energized by our consciousness of how life can be better served in another way, and we come out with joy and pleasure at the image of how it can be, rather than be motivated by anger and bitterness toward the people who are presently creating the structures that are. When we have this transformative spirituality, we need to integrate it with political consciousness. We need to really understand how the structures are working that are oppressing us. We have to watch out for the kind of spirituality that simply gets us trying to get the right attitude within ourselves, that helps us to live happily and spiritually within a world where there's a lot of violence, out of the hope that if we can just transform ourselves, the energy radiating from us will contribute to change. I'm convinced that we need more than that kind of spirituality. We need a spirituality that not only helps us to transcend our bitterness and our anger, but that is integrated with a real consciousness of what is happening that's creating the violence, and that mobilizes us to create change, not just to hope that by purifying ourselves, the energy coming from us will create the change. One of my social change objectives for the last several years has been to do what I can do to contribute to transforming our judicial system from one based on the concept of retributive justice to one based on restorative justice. Our present judicial system, retributive justice, comes out of a spirituality that I'm very concerned about, that I feel does great violence on our planet. I'm talking about that kind of spirituality that is based on the concept that there are superiors who know what is right and who, on the basis of their judgments, have the right to punish or reward people. If people are judged as bad, then these people who call themselves superiors have a right to give these people what they deserve. This concept of deserve is central to the concept of retributive justice. And if the superior judges people as good, then they reward them. Our judicial system is based on this way of thinking, that there are people who know what's right and what's wrong, and who therefore have the right to punish people when they deserve it. Within cultures that have this system, people in positions of authority use that concept of justice. So parents believe that since they are superior to children, they have the right to punish or reward them when they judge the child as deserving those treatments. Unfortunately, many teachers use the same form of spirituality based on these judgments by superiors. The concept that I'm interested in supporting is restorative justice, which is based on an entirely different way of thinking and leads to entirely different ways of exercising justice. Restorative justice has as its purpose to find ways of getting everyone's needs met so that peace and harmony can be retrieved when pain and conflict exist between parties. This kind of spirituality that looks for ways of getting everybody's needs met, that doesn't judge people as evil and deserving of punishment, it looks at a threefold situation. There's three parties that have to be dealt with whenever somebody's needs have not been met through a crime of some sort. There's the person who's been affected by the crime. We want to end in a way that this person is brought back to healing and in which their needs are fulfilled. A second party in this kind of justice is the person who acted in a way that created pain for others. We want to restore the situation by replacing whatever education led to this person behaving as they did is now replaced with an education that supports their contributing to people's well-being rather than doing things which create suffering for people. And the third party involved in restorative justice is the community that provided the education that contributed to the person's crime. We need to look at why is it that some people get their needs met by robbing, raping, and doing other things that cause great suffering. The old spirituality says this is because such people are evil and deserving to be punished and suffer for their actions. The spirituality of restorative justice says that these people are meeting their needs in the way they have been educated to meet their needs. So we need to have the surrounding community look at how are we providing education for people, and how have we failed in this situation, and what do we need to do to support this person learning a different way, and to look at how we are educating people and to make sure we are educating people to see that our well-being is one and the same, that we can never meet our own needs at other people's expense. Now, this concept of restorative justice is not a new one. There are many cultures throughout the world that have historically always used restorative justice and still do. What restorative justice looks like in these cultures that go about seeing justice in a radically different way, whose spirituality does not believe that people are evil or good. It believes that we all, when we're functioning in harmony with our nature, enjoy more than anything else contributing to one another's well-being. And therefore, when they see people doing things that contribute to pain on the part of others, that violate the rights of others, they do not interpret these people as evil or bad. They believe that the people must have forgotten the power they have to enrich life and how good it is to contribute to people's well-being. And therefore, they surround them with people who know them, and they have a circle in which these people around them remind them of all of the things that they have done that has enriched their lives. Because their spirituality doesn't imply that this person did what they did because they're evil and deserve to be punished. They believe that a person would only act that way if something has disconnected them, has made them forget that the good life is how we contribute to one another's well-being. So I'd like to describe restorative justice and show how you can restore peace and harmony between warring parties when we start with a different spirituality, one that implies that we all enjoy contributing to one another's well-being unless something disconnects us. And so what we need to do then to restore peace and harmony is to reconnect people with that which they need to be conscious of, that will help them naturally enjoy contributing to people's well-being rather than to act in ways that are harmful to people. So what I do in restorative justice of this kind is similar to what I described in the healing work that I talked about in a previous session. And I try to engage in the creating the connection that will help restore peace and harmony between the two parties. Now, I start by asking who has been harmed and injured by this behavior to express how life has been affected by this. So I use nonviolent communication in supporting to express clearly what feelings and needs were violated by the action. So I help to reveal pain nakedly. I'm sorry is a form of the old justice system. It's part of the system of justice that tries to make people penitent for what they've done, blaming them for what they've done, getting them to hate themselves for what they've done. And the idea is that if you are sorry enough and are penitent enough, you've suffered enough, then you can be forgiven. We want to replace that concept in restorative justice, not with apology, but with sincere mourning that I've described in other sessions. In my experience, very often, just the empathy that took place, that is most of the healing. If a person's house was destroyed by someone angry at them, after we have gone through helping each side hear each other's needs empathically, there might be more that's needed to be done to restore justice. the person whose house was destroyed may request support in rebuilding the house or getting financial support for rebuilding the house. But whatever it is that is determined is mutually agreed upon, because everyone has the consciousness that what we want to do is restore peace and harmony, not to punish the bad person in a way they deserve to be punished.